Most of you know me. For those who do not, my name is Luke Papineau. I've been coming to this church for probably a year and a half or so. Um, and I'm just going to share my testimony here. I think of how big the world is and how many people are in it, and that this is just one testimony. It's an amazing thing when you really think about it. It's hard to wrap your mind around how many people are out there and all the different kinds of testimonies. I do want to bring a disclaimer that we will be talking about suicides. There's drugs in this story. There's war and there's combat. So I also want people to know that this is not something that I really want to do. This is something that I feel the Lord is pushing me to do. It's completely out of my character to want to get up here and speak in front of everybody about these things. Most combat veterans that have gone through stuff like this don't want to talk about it. A lot of them shut themselves up, and they don't come out, and a good amount of them don't even survive it. So it's all the glory to God. So I just wrote this down, and I'm just going to read it because it's going to help me stay on track. So before getting started, I want to clarify that not every veteran's story is this way. Many soldiers that get deployed do not see combat. There are many jobs in the military, most of which are support roles. Only about 10% of military personnel actually experience combat. If you want to follow God, to be prepared to experience suffering in a world that sees otherwise. In my own life, the pain, trials, grief, sorrow, war, attachment has also brought me love, sense of family, excitement, meaning, and beauty. Words tend to lose their meaning these days, but I mean every sense of them. When you choose resistance over ease, you find the true meaning of life. Feel the gifts of God, but only if you push to follow Him. Sure, you could live the life of a common man, seeking safety, distraction, fakeness, pride, and superficiality. But when we live this way, God's gift to us to feel and be closer to Him diminishes in a great way. No one likes to suffer. We try to avoid it, often at all costs. Sometimes it is unavoidable, but it is in that way that God shows us His goodness. I thank God for the experience of the suffering that I have had. For if there was none in my life, I may not have sought Him. According to a report published by the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs in 2016, which analyzed 55 million veterans' records from 1979 to 2014, they found an average of 20 war vets commit suicide a day. That trend continues today. I want to tell you a little bit about my journey through my testimony and bring awareness as to why this number is so high. I joined the Vermont Army National Guard in 2004. I was a driver of an M1 main battle tank that was short-lived, however, as units in the state transitioned to a cavalry unit. I changed my job to a wheeled vehicle mechanic. I was good at what I did. Izzy, sorry about you. We're both new at this, so Izzy down. I've only had her for a few weeks, and I'll get into that later. Good girl. I was good at what I did, and one of the most qualified for the job on the account of my education in that line of work. In 2010, I prepared to deploy, knowing I was leaving behind my pregnant wife to give birth to our son without me. To be away from them for an entire year, gone fighting a war. Part of me didn't want to do it, but another part of me felt like I had to. I could not leave my comrades whom I trained with. Before I deployed, during training, my thoughts raced constantly, asking myself, am I going to be able to handle combat? How am I going to react? Am I going to get shot, wounded? Will I make it back home to see my family again? Military training that I went through develops a muscle memory response to situations of war. The training was so repetitious, so tedious sometimes, that I actually craved to be in combat. In December of 2010, I headed to Afghanistan. I was a mechanic attached to an infantry unit, Charlie Troop, 1st 172nd, 86th Mountain Brigade. It was my job to keep all vehicles, generators, etc. running and join alongside the infantry men with their tasks. I was at a place called Dandar. It was a very small combat outpost in the Khoisafi region, strategic in its position as it was a high weapons trafficking area and could be used as a launch pad site for attacks on Bagram Air Force Base, which was miles away. There was no running water there, no electricity. Our toilet was a trench in the ground, and we used lime to cover it up, and we burned all of our trash. The compound was basically 2 brick walls about 20 feet apart, maybe less, that went around in a horseshoe shape. There were small spaces within these walls that 2 soldiers could live in, one cot next to the other, cramped but livable. The compound was originally built by the UN in the 80s after the Russians pulled out as a place to enable trade and business within the area. When we got there, we fortified it with HESCO barriers along the outside and inside, built bunkers with sandbags and machine guns on the roof. We had about 30 to 40 soldiers at the compound at all times, as we would rotate guys out once a week. After 5 to 7 days, I would go to Bagram, where I would get a warm meal and work at a large shop, maintaining vehicles for a couple days. Then back to Dandar for a week. We also had artillery in the center of the compound, 160 millimeter mortar and a 120 millimeter mortar tube. We were situated at the base of 3 large mountains. Not far from there was a windowless building that was a schoolhouse for children. Along with our men, it was our job to train a few Macedonian and Afghan National Army troops as well. None of them which could speak English. We had an interpreter to communicate. I believe most of us can imagine what the weapons of war are capable of doing to the human body and mind. Combat can be looked upon as the savage, brutal, exhausting, and dirty business of war. Soldiers are trained to be stoic in battle, push emotions aside, remain focused, sleep lightly, be hypervigilant and hyper-aware at all times. These are all important factors in determining life and death. All these things become ingrained and burned into one's mind and behavior. With daily repetition of combat events, the brain often operates without thinking. A lot like animals living on instinct to survive. Unfortunately, these attributes do not allow veterans to function well upon returning to civilian life. Many vets who experience combat cannot find others who understand them and therefore struggle to relate to others. What further complicates things is the loss of intense comradeship between soldiers, which only exists in the midst of the horrors of war. It is the bond, the glue, that holds the unit together. This tightly knit fabric enables once ordinary men to do extraordinary things together that they otherwise could not do. While staring death straight in the eye. I miss the camaraderie terribly. This type of brotherhood is rare in the civilian world, for it takes an intense pressure and trauma to forge such a comradeship. For this is where a person's true colors show. There is no place to hide, no timeouts. Most attacks took place at night as the enemy used the cover of darkness for their advantage. It would usually happen late at night when I would be awoken by loud screams from our fire watchmen who would see a shrieking light that arched across the night sky toward our position, followed by a loud, almost deafening death whistle. Incoming, we would scream, which told everybody that we had to hit the ground. Jumping out of our cots into the darkness, donning my Kevlar helmet and bracing for impact, praying I was not in its path. Then an explosion that would nearly knock me off my feet. I'd throw on my boots, vest, grab my rifle, do a buddy check, run up the ladder on the roof, and man my 50 cal machine gun, surrounded by sandbags. As we'd race to get our bearings, incoming rounds would increase, then small arms fire. Rockets, enemy artillery would drown the atmosphere around us. Upon our chance to return fire, a spectacular light show of tracer rounds, explosions, and fireballs would fill our entire view all around us, the likes of which no fireworks show could ever match. I'd look around at the mountains that surrounded us and could see through the silhouettes of gunfire in the background. We had one armored truck on each of the mountains. We called them observation posts. They were set out so we could see beyond our little area where our mountains were. And they would be fighting for their lives too, since they were by themselves. But they were also calling grid coordinates to our artillery guys to fire for effect on the enemy. The noises and percussions of all these things was so loud that sometimes ears would bleed. And some blasts were so close, it felt as if the breath was sucked right out of your lungs. After a few minutes of this, I would feel my hearing start to step down, lower and lower and lower, until all I could hear were bass sounds. Sometimes there were just probing attacks so the enemy could judge our strength. Other times there were what we called multiple complex attacks, where they would launch offensives at multiple points. We would often refer to the Dandar compound as the Alamo because of the possibility of getting overrun. We honestly thought that was going to happen, and it did happen quite close a few times. On the night of my 23rd birthday, the fighting was so persistent that we had to call in an airstrike. I watched an entire mountainside become deformed by bombs that were dropped by our planes. We found out later there were caves with ordnance weapons caches inside of them. We also had to go out into the local population and help them. Our enemy did not wear uniforms. Therefore, there is no front line. People you were helping one day would fire upon your back the next. At times, children were even used as pawns in a deadly game. Some people have asked me if I regret joining the military and being away from my family. I do not. Even though combat has left its mark on me, it's enabled me to witness amazing works of God. Like the time I saw a truck with a gaping hole in the driver's side door window. I met the driver. His face was burned and gauze wrapped around his eyes. He was blinded. Just a few days later, he received his sight back. Or the miraculous fact that none of my brothers in that compound died while we were there was God's protection over us. Another time I remember I was with a group of men in the daytime. We were rushing in to do an ambush on an enemy mortar position, which was closing in on our compound. We used to fly a flag there, and the flag would give away windage information to them, and so they would walk rounds in, so we stopped flying that flag. But anyways, during that ambush, when we were racing down, I could hear cracks of small arms fire going by my left ear. As I ran, I fell through a wall of bushes and onto the ground. I realized quickly that I was in trouble. I looked left and right, no cover or concealment. I could see flashing of a gun barrel from my left side, only a couple 100 meters away. I noticed there was another soldier to my right. He was an Afghan National Army guy. Couldn't speak English, but we both looked at each other as if it was the end. I thought for sure it was. In what seemed like the longest minute of my life, I was able to return fire and carry on the fight. In normal conditions, we should not have survived that. God's hand of protection was there. And even though we couldn't trust many, I would look at some of the natives and their children. They were caught in the middle of all this. I felt like I could see the world in their eyes. Some of the selfless things they did for us can only come from the Lord leading them to do so. I'd often start my 12-hour shift perched upon the top of a mountain at an observation post. I'd watch the fiery sunset retreat behind the snow-capped mountains as the sun reflected off the snow like glass. I'd marvel at God's beautiful, beautiful painting that no one could imitate. After a year of being gone, I finally returned home to be reunited with Sabrina and Jeremiah. The reintegration with my family and back into society was extremely difficult. And in some cases, I would say even worse than the combat itself. I could not hold a job for more than a couple of years. Everything was a threat. I could trust no one. I could only hold a job that required me to work by myself. And what was worse, I was losing my faith and almost completely desensitized to feeling common emotions. I was discharged from the Army in 2013. The years that followed were difficult, but I managed to act like I was okay. I would go about the motions, acting as if I was enjoying spending time with my family. But in reality, I wasn't present. I couldn't be present anywheres, constantly looking around and wondering where these threats are going to come. Sabrina at times would ask me, "Where's your mind at right now?" As I would often look lost in thought. With that, I just learned how to be a good pretender. Constant nightmares and flashbacks of the war consumed my sleep and even my daily thoughts, and in the end, my life. I used drugs and alcohol to numb myself further. I contemplated suicide much of the time. It didn't help that I would hear of fellow soldiers I was with that had taken their own lives. It still happens to this day. And I was too stubborn to listen to my wife and family, who pleaded with me to get help. Then God provided a form of healing through homesteading. By growing our own food and raising animals, people began to notice what we were doing and wanted to buy food from us. Thus, that is how our small farm came to be. There is something to be said about raising God's animals and stewardshiping his land that is healing. Coming out of a place of death and destruction, he allowed me to see the beauty in life again and gave me a purpose. After 7 years of ignorance, I finally went to the VA. They wanted to give me a handful of pills a day to help me sleep, deal with anxiety, depression, etc. I refused. It was then that a doctor recommended a service dog. I scoffed at the thought. And I told her that I have all my limbs and I'm plenty capable of doing things myself. It was then that she brought me to the realization that I had a mobility impairment. It wasn't in my body, but it was in my mind, and that the dog would help with that. So once again, I ignored this for years, and things got a lot worse. I actually tried taking my own life, while at the same time almost ending in complete disaster for my whole family. One morning shortly after, when I was out doing chores in the field, Jeremiah noticed something in the distance. Of course, I was miserable and not caring. I told him to give me a hand. He didn't move, obviously captivated by something he was looking at. I walked over to him, ready to yell. But before I could speak, he said, "Do you see what I see, Dad?" Ignorantly and angrily, I told him I saw nothing, and I was beginning to lose my temper, which I often did. I still do today sometimes. Then Jeremiah, without thinking, grabbed my face and slowly positioned my head to where his head was. And off into the distance, I witnessed the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. There was an apple hanging down on the side of a tree. I saw a twinkle of a dewdrop on the side of it. The morning light seemed to flow through the drop, and on the back side of it, an amazing prism of color funneled outwards. If I had moved my head just slightly in any direction, it would have disappeared. It could have only been seen at that point in time and place. God gave me hope through this image, as nothing else would get through to me. I began to seek God's word and became hungry for it. Things began to get better. After many years of praying, God answered Sabrina's prayer for further healing. The words echoed by the VA doctor years ago became a reality through a program called Canines for Warriors. Canines pairs veterans who have PTSD and TBIs with highly trained service dogs, such as Izzy here. After a 2-year wait to be paired with my service dog, I spent 3 weeks in Florida just last month for training. My class consisted of 11 other war veterans who experienced the same issues that I do every day. The Lord could not have paired me with a better dog. Due to my constant state of hypervigilance, Izzy helps me by watching my surroundings and alerts me to real threats, as my mind has a hard time distinguishing between what's real and what's not. She helps my mind slow down and be more at ease. When my mind goes to dark places, she snaps me out of it. The VA classifies Izzy as a prosthetic. Picture a man who loses an arm. The arm will not grow back, but he can get a prosthetic one to help him. It will not change the fact that his arm is missing, and it definitely will never be as good as a real one, but it will help his quality of life. That is what Izzy is for my mind. I cannot unsee the things I have seen, but God has given me a tool to help aid me in the aftermath of war. I thank him for all the blessings he has given me and my family. I do have some pictures of where I was that I would like to share. And I'll just say a quick little thing probably about each one of them. So that's me on our first year wedding anniversary. I was on a C-117 in Afghanistan, getting in country. So I had somebody take that picture and send it to my wife to tell her happy anniversary. The next picture here is in Afghanistan. The scenery is very beautiful, snow-capped mountains, lots of sand and everything. It's you can go to the next slide. That is in Bagram, which is a huge Air Force base. Just some pictures of inside there with tents and stuff that we began to live in the very beginning. Next slide, please. Just some more pictures of up-armored trucks that we had and just staging areas and stuff, getting ready for. We did a lot of foot patrols. We did a lot of vehicle marches through all sorts of places, through places that you would never think you could be able to drive through. Next slide. That's a minefield. Minefields litter Afghanistan. Back when I was there, the number one heavily mined country was Afghanistan. I believe that's changed to the Ukraine now because of the current wars there. But Russia has a really, it's heavily mined because of Russia. Back in the 80s when Russia couldn't hold the land, when they pulled back, they mined everything. So you cannot walk off the beaten path in Afghanistan. We've had American soldiers actually step on landmines. And another horrendous thing that I've seen a lot of is children being affected by landmines. So landmines are everywhere. And this is just a known field that has landmines in it. And a lot of times, destroyed equipment like that is booby-trapped. I've seen that too, where people think they could get a souvenir or local civilians are trying to take something and it's booby-trapped. So mine was a very real problem there. Next slide. There's another picture of the minefield, many minefields. I think there were 20 active minefields in around the Bagram area alone. And of course, when you move out of there, you don't know where they are. But anyway, they're all over there. There's another picture of staging area in Bagram. Those are our vehicles. We're getting ready to head out to Dandar for the first time. We had to traverse those mountains. Not only do we have to traverse those mountains, but there are enemies out there. They set up booby traps. They obviously they don't want us there. So it's just an amazing, all encompassing, just crazy world out there. Things that you see and go through. Next slide. This is at the this is in the area where Dandar is. Dandar is actually the name of the village where our compound was. You can see a little bit of the village on the right side in the middle. And this is me on the top of an armored truck, and we're headed to an OP. I know in here I mentioned we had OP's observation posts. So the Dandar compound was surrounded by 3 big mountains, and there would be 1 truck on each mountain so we could see outwards because you're just sitting in a bowl. So we need to have eyes out. And so this is where we would sit. We would do 12 hours a day, 12 hours at night. I was part of the night shift. I would do 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. 4 times a week or something like that with that. And that right there is a Mark 19 grenade launcher on a turret. And the Dandar compound, I don't believe you can see it, the actual compound, but you will. So next slide, please. Another thing we had to worry about were scorpions and camel spiders and all sorts of crazy animals you don't see over here. You know, that right there is a type of scorpion. That guy was sleeping. That's a Macedonian guy, and he was sleeping and he felt something crawling on his back. And when he turned over, he found that. I don't know how he got it in the bottle, but he showed that to me and we looked at it. And so I was always looking in my boots and in my clothes for scorpions and camel spiders. We had a few camel spiders incidents as well. But that's the one picture I decided to show for that. Next slide, please. That's a small toolbox I worked out of. Being out in this compound, like I said, there's probably like 30 or 40 guys there. It's a very small compound. I could only work with basic tools. So that was my mechanics tool chest that I was able to work out of there. And that plywood half door was the door to my room. There were 2 people in it, very small. Next slide. We burned all of our trash. That's the burn pit. So next slide. And that is on top of one of the OPs. I believe that's OP2. We had OP 1, 2, and 3, and that is OP2 because that's where I was at. So it's just an armored truck sitting on top of a mountain, and you have all this field of view. Next slide. There's another picture of one of us on the outside of the truck on top of OP2. And just that picture alone, you can tell just how huge everything is. These mountains are nothing like what we have here in Vermont. These are huge. Just an amazing view of God's creation. Next slide. That is a picture right there of the Dandar compound. The building right on the lower side, that is how small it is. We lived in the walls, and basically they're just openings and spaces. You can see trash burning right there. That was always burning. And there's a schoolhouse right on the right-hand side, upper right-hand side was a schoolhouse. And that's where a lot of children were, probably 50 or 60 children of all different ages would go there and every day, and they did their schooling. Like I said, no running water, no electricity, no none of that. This is a view from on top of one of the mountains, actually going up to OP2. I took this photo in the truck as we were going. Next slide. This is a picture of a part of the village of Dandar. We've had firefights in this area. The bushes I was talking about falling through is in that picture. It's just amazing. I always used to think how amazing it was how these people, they have nothing. They have no power, no running water. It's a third world country, but it's amazing that they can do stuff like this, and they take what little they have and be able to do so much with it. Next slide. That's a picture of me just on the outside of the Dandar compound. We're getting ready to leave. There's a couple Macedonians behind me. And yeah, we're just getting our gear ready to go down. That's my 50 cal on the turret of one of the trucks that I would man. Next slide. And those are switchbacks. Those mountains that I showed you that we had to traverse through, you can't just drive through them because it's like this. You'll never make it. So they're actually switchbacks, roads that go like this across the whole mountainside and then down again. Thank God we never got attacked going down those roads. We always were concerned there would be an IED on those roads, or they would set up an ambush, because that would be a horrible place. All they really had to do was just attack the first vehicle, and then we would have been done, because there's no way you can back out of those. They would have just stopped us right there. There's no way you can back out of those sharp turns. We've actually had a few rollovers. Luckily, no one died, but they did get injured. So thank the Lord that's another hand in God right there, that they did not attack us. It was always our mind about that. These pictures are the kids, and they have a special place in my heart. These children are actually one of the things that really haunts me every day, every night. It used to really bother me, but I've grown to accept it, and now I can't imagine my life without these kinds of memories. These are the kids right next to the Dandar compound that went to that schoolhouse, and we just, a friend of mine, another soldier friend of mine, we used to get care packages through the mail. And a friend of mine thought that maybe it'd be a good idea to go to the schoolhouse and maybe give them a few of these things, So on the trip back to Dandar from Bagram, we brought, I think it was a soccer ball, a Gatorade, and a coloring. So we're going to give this to the kids. So when we got to the Dandar compound, we talked to our first sergeant. They said, "Okay, sure, go ahead and do that. We'll provide overwatch." So we had people with the bunkers and stuff behind us. If anything started to get bad, at least we had that protection. So it was me. Charles was his name, and then we had an interpreter with us. We went over, we found the principals, or whatever, the people in charge over at that school, and we asked them to bring their 3 best students. And so on our way to the school, these are pictures that I took on the way. Now these kids, they've never seen, this was not a cell phone, this was an actual camera. I didn't own a cell phone. They never seen a camera before, these kids. They didn't know what it was. And what was even more fascinating is that when I would take a picture of them, I would actually turn it over and show them, they would see their faces in this camera, and they thought they were stuck in the camera somehow. They were completely mystified, and I will never forget that kind of reaction that those kids had. It's something that you don't see around here. You can go to the next slide. That is a picture of the 3 best students. And you can see the soccer ball. I believe it's a coloring book, and I don't know if it's a Gatorade on the other one. So those are the ones that they picked, and we stood there with the instructors. As I said in here, a big part of our job was to enforce the COIN. The military, the Army calls it the COIN. What it is the rule, the ROE, the rules of engagement. Our job was to embed ourselves in the local populace and kind of become friends with them and show them that we're there to help them. Because a lot of times they look at us like an occupying force, which rightfully so. But we had to get with them and work with them, help them with things they needed and everything else. And they would be, the United States Army, the military is giving out money to help them build bridges and roads and wells and whatever. So they're going to take it. But there are always some that play both sides. And if you'll notice right next to me, there's a guy who's hiding behind that child. This kind of thing happens. I'm pretty convinced, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty convinced he was one of the guys that played both sides. And they were afraid because we did have technology at the time, although it was very new. We did have photo taking technology that would take perimeter measurements around their face and stuff, and then it would recognize them in different places. So maybe he thought that that was some kind of special camera. He did not want to be known. It's just something that I've always noticed that in this picture. I didn't realize it till later. Okay, so next slide. There's another picture of the kids at Dandar. Next slide. There's another picture of the actual schoolhouse. Next slide. I can't see. Oh, is that the camel there? Yeah. So this is on one of the sharp turns on the switchbacks on the mountains. And we just this one day, we happened to run into a stray camel just in the middle of nowhere. We almost hit it. And I think the next picture shows another shot. Yes. Just these camels, you'll have goats, and there's a lot of wild dogs out there. That was pretty interesting. So I can't make it. Oh, that is my living area. That's how tight that area was. There's only big enough to have two cots, one on each side. And I got my M4 carbine rifle there. I always carried a 9mm pistol on my side. And we only ate MREs over there. Very tight and cramped spaces, but it was livable. Next slide. Another picture of the switchbacks. Next slide. These are just some of the living conditions of the locals. I think that's a goat farm, and some of them live in tents, others live in mud huts. A lot of times these people here will actually travel with their goats because there's almost no vegetation. It's amazing to see off in the distance. You have huge mountains, you'll see little dots, a whole cluster of little dots crossing the mountain. What that is they're shepherds, and they have a whole lot of goats, and they're just grazing the mountainside. But since there's not much vegetation out there, they have to go for miles and miles. So what they do a lot of the times is they'll tent out, and these shepherds will follow their flocks throughout the country, so to speak, so they can get enough food, and they'll sleep with them. Next slide. There's one of the children on the side of the road as we're going by. Next slide. That is a picture of one of the bunkers. I'm sitting on top of one of the bunkers right there, looking out from the corner of the Dandar compound. Next slide. There is a dog. That's at the entrance of the Dandar compound. Like I said, there's a lot of stray dogs out there. That one there, we called him Ahab, and he just showed up and he stayed around. But because it was such a hectic place with the chaos of combat, that dog actually suffered tremendously mentally, and eventually it didn't make it. Next slide. This is on the very inside of the Dandar compound. That right there is a 60mm mortar piece right there, and there's a 120mm mortar in the back that you can't see. Very tight space. You can see a bunker that's up in the corner there. And the sandbags we set up and everything. So yeah, next slide. There's another picture of the Dandar compound from a different angle. Next slide. And there's a picture. There was a storm going over. I think it was OP2. And I just I took a picture because I thought it looked pretty neat. And that's the homecoming. When I got back from Afghanistan, my wife and Jeremiah was a baby. Aubrey was not born yet, and my parents and my sister. Next slide. And this is a picture of when I was in Florida for Canines for Warriors. I need a drink. This is Dan Baker, and when I first went there to Florida, I was praying that I'd be able to find another Christian that I could talk to and maybe even spread the goodness of the Lord around a bit. Going to a place like where I went in Florida, you have to realize a lot of these guys, like I said, the 11 other veterans I met down there, they were going through very similar things to me. Some of them handled it well, other ones did not handle it very well. Other ones lost their entire families. They picked up and left. Other ones, some other of these guys, they locked themselves up in their houses and never left. They'd have somebody else go get their food and stuff like that. There are even a couple people that when we would do public access training with the dogs, they would force us to have to go into stores and things like that. And I know it sounds very easy thing to do. We do it every day, right? But for some of these guys, they can't do it. A lot of these guys, which I've had to do too, when you have to clear houses, in country, in combat, there are people that are in the corners and things like that. They don't like the fact that there could be something behind that aisle or, whatever. I had a huge problem with that as well. But some people, it was their first time going in the store in years. So you can imagine how kind of traumatic it was. So the dog kind of helps take their mind off from what's going on, and the dog will bark and let them know when there is a real threat. So anyway, getting back to, kind of got sidetracked, but getting back to Dan Baker. When I first couple days I was there, it was just really busy, and it didn't seem like anybody I could tell was really a Christian. I talked a little bit, but nothing was resonating. And we went to a restaurant, and I sat across from this man here, and when we both got our food at the same time, I noticed he was praying over our food, and I said, "Oh, that's great." So I prayed over my food, and I talked to him, and turns out that he is a Southern Baptist preacher out of Tennessee. He is actually a Vietnam War vet, and he has he told me his story, and it's similar. It's very similar. But I thank God that I met him. I was able to talk with him a lot, and we were able to share stories and talk to each other. And I still keep contact with him today. And it's amazing when you have the Lord in your heart, and you're proud. You're proud to be a Christian, and you wanna be able to tell others about the Lord. It's an amazing thing to me how other people can see that in you, and you don't even have to say nothing. For example, when I was down there, it was 3 weeks, so after like the second week, I had a couple other guys, veterans from there. They came up to me and they said, we noticed you're a little bit different. You pray over for your food and stuff, and we heard you mention Jesus and God and stuff off and on, and tell me about your God, And anytime anybody ever says that, in the back of my mind, I think, they're asking me about God. Who doesn't know about God? But I'm reminded that there are a lot of people that don't even think about it. They think that, this is just a coincidence, and life sucks. But so I try to explain this to some people, to these couple guys, and I can't help but think that the devil is at work too at the same time. As I said in here, if you live a life of distraction, comfort all the time, and just seeking out those things, it diminishes the way God can get to you, because I believe it lets the devil in. For example, a problem that I had was these guys that were asking me questions, they were very interested. You could see the spark was on in their eyes, like the perfect time to talk to them about the Lord. But then all of a sudden their cell phone would go off. Facebook, chat, Instagram, whatever. They would do whatever, and then you start talking to them again, and then that would happen again. And then I'd be like, well, why don't we go for a walk? We had a sidewalk we can go on. We were locked down at this campus, by the way. You couldn't leave. There was one sidewalk you could go on, but that was it. But we were supposed to do that, but it's just the distractions keep coming. So my point is, the devil wants to distract us all the time. He wants to take our mind off off from the Lord all the time, and you cannot let that happen. It's very important. So the next slide. There's just a picture of the look command. It's not a really good picture because she's looking at the camera, but so that is one of the things that really helps a lot of us combat veterans out. So what she will do is, like, if I'm in a store or something like that, I can put her in look command where she'll go around side me and watch my back. And just because I don't like it when anybody's behind me. I mean, obviously you can't fix that. Here is okay, but in a public setting, I don't like that at all. If you look at where I live in the house, if you look at my shop, everything, I'm always situated in the back corner where I can see everything. I don't like any kind of walls that are halfway high or anything like that. But anyways, so her job right there is looking behind me, and she's going to notify me if there is a real threat. People just walking by, she's not going to do anything. And that's telling me, okay, there's no threat I have to worry about, you know. It just eases my mind. So that's one example of one of the commands that she does. Next slide. That is a front command where I can set her down, take the leash off, and walk wherever I need to go, and she'll stay where I'm at. And then she'll come up to me when I call her, because there are things that I can't do with the service dog. And I can stake her here or there or whatever, which she does great as well. But yeah, so next slide. And there's a picture of graduation, and there's what, 2 or 3 other veterans there walking at the Canines for Warriors place. And I don't know if I mentioned about Canines for Warriors real quick. I don't want to make it about them. This is all about the Lord and God, but I did want to say that it's an amazing program. It's all done by donations, and they've been doing this since, I think, 2011. And it's made a big difference for a lot of vets going through that program. And their dogs, most of their dogs are rescued, have been rescued. And then they're put through like an 8 or 9 month program to see if they can be service dog. More than half the dogs don't make it, but they get readopted out. The ones that can make it are finally paired with a veteran. Izzy, on the other hand, was not a rescue. She was actually a donation from a program called Project to Heal, which raises service dogs. So she was actually a donation. Next slide. And I believe that's the last one, and that's just the last picture I was in Florida with at the beach. And yeah, so that's my story. And yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank the Lord.